Self-Healing Podcast, Episode 1. Welcome, friends, curious lurkers, and the one person currently sorting socks while listening. This is the very first episode of my quiet little podcast corner, a place where we read slowly, think deeply, and occasionally whisper, "Oh wow," to ourselves when the metaphysical penny drops. In this episode, I'll be exploring RJ Spina's book, Supercharged Self-Healing. This isn't a review or a chapter-by-chapter breakdown. It's more like me studying out loud in my bedroom, imagining I'm at a magical boarding school that specializes in esoteric subjects. The idea for this podcast was simple. If you really want to understand something, try teaching it. And since I'm currently reading this book in the full Oxford University sense of the word, I figured, why not read it out loud, paraphrase it, and see what insights come through in the process. So consider this podcast my own syllabus. And if you're listening, you've just stumbled into a very unorthodox classroom. Now, Supercharged Self-Healing isn't your typical wellness book. It's intense. It opens with RJ Spina casually recounting how he used to astral project as a child, as in go to sleep, float above his body, sometimes travel to local mountaintops, standard bedtime activities. What struck me wasn't just the astral travel, though yes, I'd like to request a tour, but the way he frames detachment. He writes about a lack of earthly attachment to being human as the key that allowed him to catapult his consciousness into higher realms. And honestly, that line captivated me because we're so used to clinging to our stories, to our symptoms, to the identity of person with a problem. But RJ's telling us gently, firmly, you are not your condition. If you can observe it, it's not you. You are what perceives. And suddenly, everything changes. That's where we're starting. So, grab a cup of your favorite drink, coffee, hot chocolate, or tea. Get comfortable in a cozy spot and let's read like mystics, slowly, page by page, peeling back what we think we know about pain, healing, and what it means to be the one who watches, not the one who suffers. Part 2. Astral Travel and the Art of Not Gripping So Tightly. Alright, so let's get into the first few pages of Supercharged Self-Healing and what RJ Spina says. The book opens strong, not with an anecdote about celery juice or a definition of energy healing. No. RJ kicks things off by telling us that as a child, he regularly left his body at night and floated around above his bed, around the house, through the neighborhood, even across mountaintops. He would close his eyes to go to sleep and moments later be in another realm, experiencing life as pure spirit, casual. No warm-up exercises, no Himalayan salt lamp, just a child lying down, slipping into non-physical reality like someone casually checking the weather. And for him, this wasn't some big spiritual awakening. It was normal. It was just how his consciousness worked back then. Of course, as he grew up, he realized most people weren't exactly throwing him high fives for his nightly out-of-body mountaineering. So like any rational astral traveler who wants to avoid being institutionalized, he stopped talking about it. And then eventually, he stopped doing it altogether. But here's the interesting bit. He didn't forget. and by the time he was 24, he began to intellectually piece together what he had been doing instinctively as a child, a kind of spontaneous spiritual technology that most of us unlearn. That's when he began his adult journey of deconstructing, exploring, and teaching these experiences. And I have to say, I love this origin story. It's not, I hit rock bottom and discovered breathwork. It's, I used to leave my body and go hiking in other dimensions before bed, but society told me to knock it off. Honestly, same. But what really stopped me in my tracks was this one line. RJ writes that it was his lack of earthly attachment to being human that allowed him to shift into higher realms. Let's just sit with that for a second. Lack of earthly attachment to being human. Not self-hatred, not body loathing, just a kind of lightness, a lack of over-identification with the human experience. I find that sentence quietly radical. Because if you think about it, the moment you stop gripping so tightly to your identity, your story, your labels, your "this is who I am and this is how I suffer" narrative, something shifts. You make space for something else to emerge, a new experience, a new reality, or in RJ's case, an entirely different plane of existence. It got me thinking, maybe one of the most underrated superpowers is simply this, not gripping so tightly. What if that's the gateway to transformation? Just enough detachment to let a different truth slip in. The other big theme in these early pages is something RJ returns to again and again. You are not your condition. He says, quote, "If you can perceive it, it cannot be you. You are what perceives." Now, I know we've all heard some version of this. You are not your thoughts, you are not your body, you are the observer. But reading it in this context, with the clarity of someone who has lived the teaching, hits differently. RJ isn't writing this from an Instagram quote carousel. He's writing it as someone who was paralyzed from the chest down and still managed to observe the pain, the fear, the body, without identifying as those things. And that's where the book takes its sharpest turn, from poetic metaphysics to unapologetic empowerment. He tells us flat out, no one is going to overcome your obstacles for you because they can't. Your healing, physical, emotional, spiritual, is yours entirely. And yes, he acknowledges it will be overwhelming, brutal even. He's not sugarcoating it. Healing, he says, is a crushingly lonely individual endeavor, which for me was a weird kind of comfort, because if you've ever been in the midst of something hard, really hard, and you felt like you were the only one carrying it, well, this line says, yes, you are. That's what this is. But you're not broken. You're just deep in the work that only you can do. Now, that could all feel quite heavy, but RJ doesn't leave us there. Right as you're sinking into, oh my God, this is going to be awful, he throws you a rope. He says, quote, "Don't leak your energy on any possibilities but your triumph." Yes, that part. Let's print that on a sweatshirt, because this is where the philosophy becomes practical. He's not just telling you that healing is hard. He's telling you exactly how to aim your energy. Don't fixate on how long it'll take. Don't entertain what ifs. Don't keep Googling worst case scenarios. Put your energy on your success only. Aim there like it's the only destination on the map. So that's what I'm sitting with this week. The idea that I'm not my condition, that detachment is power, that triumph begins with choosing not to doubt, and the simple, comforting idea that if this book is in my hands, I'm ready. Part 3. The permission slip. Yes, really. Before we close, there's one more moment from the introduction I just have to highlight. The kind of line where you stop, stare at the page and think, oh, that just changed everything. He says, his transcendence of permanent paralysis and severe ill health is your permission slip to do the impossible for yourself. That's capital self. You would not have this book in your hands if you were not ready. That's not just a motivational soundbite. That's a transmission. He's saying that he did the impossible, and because he did, you can too. Not someday, not when you're more healed, more ready, more spiritual, right now, as you are. And that capital S in self, that matters. He's not just talking about your ego self, your to-do list self, your symptom tracking self. He's speaking to the higher self, the one that exists beyond pain, the one that remembers who you are, the one that's been waiting for this moment. And then, without any fuss, RJ adds, you would not have this book in your hands if you were not ready. Let's begin. That's not suggestion, it's activation. It's not encouragement, it's permission. It's your invitation to walk forward, not as someone broken, but as someone awakening. So if you're listening to this, even if you've never read the book, just know this is your permission slip to heal, to transform, to begin, to remember, to reclaim the version of yourself that never forgot what was possible. RJ said so, and I believe him. In the next episode, we'll explore how to use this book, which, let's be honest, is probably less how to read it and more how to initiate the spiritual upgrade sequence without short-circuiting your entire nervous system. But for now, just hold this line in your mind. You're ready. That's why the book found you, or this podcast episode. That's why you're here. That's why we begin.